also in due course will do our part to help deal with all sorts of different challenges. And you will see, and some of you I'm sure are students of Canadian foreign policy, know it much better than I, but you will see actually that our approach to various issues, we don't just look at bilateral relations, we look at multilateral institutions, what they're doing on the ground, and how we can help. A really good example of how we're taking a much more complex look at some of the challenges is, let's take one very, very simple and straightforward anecdote that's familiar to us all, the Syrian refugee crisis, the worst humanitarian crisis we've seen since the Second World War. It's not only that the government and Canadians from coast to coast to coast are coming together and doing the right thing, but insofar as our government is concerned, we are providing bilateral aid to all those countries in the region that are affected and are taking in refugees, whether it be Jordan, whether it be Turkey, whether it be Lebanon. So we're doing our part. We're helping those countries, but we're also assisting the UN agencies to say, you know what, we have to increase our donations to multilateral institutions if we want to see some improvement on the ground, and we really want to make a difference. So with respect to all issues, we certainly appreciate full well that we have to change our approach, and believe me, the types of issues that you are advocating for and you care about are the types of things that we all can make sure that our policymakers are listening, they're attuned to the fact that Canadians really are sick and tired of rhetoric and silliness, and they really want real solutions on the ground. Thank you so much for doing all the amazing work that you do. Obviously, the government will not always agree with 100% of what any of us say, but it's good for the government to always know that there are so many caring people who are doing, the heavy lifting and the thinking and providing solutions such as yourself. Another thing, if I may, I just wanted to note is we've all heard it before. A lot of people say students, young people nowadays, they're apathetic insofar as Canadian politics is concerned. In reality, those people who actually really are following the debate and are doing the polls and things of that nature, they've realized that that's not true at all. It's just that some people, they don't find that getting involved in domestic politics is the solution. They actually want to have more of a global impact, and they are doing, Canadians, more than ever before, are doing amazing things that affect various issue areas around the world. And I think this crowd in itself is proof positive of that. So just wanted to thank you, wanted to commend you, thank you for inspiring us all, and there is no doubt, please always do bear in mind that a lot of times you guys do have the solutions. And what it will take is, when you guys have done your thinking, is to constantly go and say, you know what, it seems to us that this is the better approach, the arguments that they're making are the right ones, and it really does make a sea change of difference. So thank you. Do know that a lot of policymakers in Ottawa really do care about these issues, maintain your activism, and there is no doubt in my mind that you will continue to make a difference. Thank you. Any questions, any concerns, any criticisms?
Okay.
No, that's great. Thank you
Yeah?
so much.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. So tonight we have Katie Kidwright and Loyce Maturu joining us, and they are going to be in conversation around the Global Fund, which many of you know the replenishment is coming up in a week, I suppose now? Yes, a week. So I will just let them introduce themselves through their conversation, and we'll hear from them more about their stories and why they're here with us tonight. Please welcome them.
front of the Member of Parliament in terms of addressing crowds all the time.
So hi everybody, my name is Katie Wright, and I am actually an old Results Canada person. Okay, well, I'm old, but you know. I used to work at Results Canada many years ago doing the great work that Erica and Shelley and their colleagues do. I currently sit on the board of Results Canada, but my day job is actually to manage what we call the Global Fund Advocates Network, which is a network of just over 500 individuals and organizations from around the world in about, I think it's 86 countries we're up to now, and we advocate for a fully funded and a more effective global fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. So this is Loyce Maturu, who is a colleague and a friend from Zimbabwe. One of the things that we do as the network, so if I seem a little nervous, it's because I'm actually not used to speaking before crowds, because part of our mandate, part of what we believe is important in terms of global fund advocacy is to make sure that the voices of the people who are affected and infected by the three diseases are at the forefront of the conversation and at the forefront of the dialogue about the Global Fund and about the issues surrounding the three diseases. And so I don't speak very often. It's usually folks like Loyce. And what we do is support a network of champions from around the world. I think we have 8 right now. We've had as many as 10 at different points in time. We support a network of champions to bring them to different capitals, different countries around the world to talk to their governments, to work with groups like Results Canada or ICAD, ACASO, Engineers Without Borders here in Canada, a number of different organizations like that around the world in those 86 countries, to have those conversations with their elected officials, with the bureaucrats, to talk to them about the importance of the Global Fund, the importance of ending the three diseases, and the opportunity that we have right now to do that. So Loyce came to us highly recommended from her work with peer-to-peer counseling and her own personal experience in her home country of Zimbabwe with HIV and TB. And so I will let Loyce introduce herself. But what I can tell you is that she has an impressive resume of amazing accomplishments over the last few months, and we're just really pleased that we've been able to bring her here back to Canada for the second time this year, because she was on stage with the Prime Minister in May when he announced that Canada would be hosting the Global Fund replenishment next week, and that they were increasing Canada's contribution by 20% from last time. So Loyce, maybe I could just let you introduce yourself and maybe just tell us a little bit about the impact of the Global Fund in your life.
Okay. Very good evening to everyone, and first of all, I'd like to say I'm truly humbled to be here today to share my story growing up with HIV. So I am based in Zimbabwe, and let me also take this opportunity to share my story. So in 2002, I lost my mother and my younger brother in the same way due to AIDS and tuberculosis. And by that time, I was only 10 years old, and it was really a depressing moment for me because I had lost the people who were close to my heart. Then from there, I started shifting households of my paternal relatives, and I stayed with one of my aunts in 2004, and I started to get sick, I lost weight, and I had to stop school for some months because of my illness. Then she went with me to the clinic because she knew how my mother and my younger brother had passed away, and I was found that I had HIV and I had tuberculosis at the same time. Knowing about it, it was really a depressing moment for me. It pained my heart. I lost all my confidence, and I thought that was the end of me. I was going to die just like how my mother and my younger brother had passed away. So I'm very grateful that I managed to get access to tuberculosis treatment at a Global Fund supported clinic, and I managed to get better, and I started to get hope in my life that I could be someone whom I can be in life, and that's when I also joined an organization that I'm working with back home in Zimbabwe, and it's called African Gender. It's an organization that works with HIV positive children. And that's how I got to accept my HIV status, because psychologically I was still struggling to accept the condition that I had HIV and I also had tuberculosis. So meeting the group of adolescents who were of the same status with me, sharing our personal experiences, it actually motivated me and inspired me to accept my HIV status and also that I had tuberculosis. So I think in a nutshell that's about me and how the Global Fund impacted my life. Yeah.
Thanks, Loyce. And I've heard you tell that story a couple of times, but it still never fails to impress me, the personal power that you've shown to sort of find a home within the work that you do and the passion that you find in life in terms of helping others who may be experiencing some of the same issues and that you've faced in your life and done so well with. Maybe I could just add a little bit of information about the Global Fund. How many of you are Results Canada volunteers, if I could just see a show of hands? Okay, so we've got a lot of, and how many of you would say before today you've heard about the Global Fund to fight against TB and malaria? Okay. How many of you ever worked for the Global Fund? See if there's any spies in the room. Okay, cool. What's that?
In what manner? When I was working for my government, I did work for it.
Okay. So one of the interesting things about the Global Fund is that it's a partnership of governments, of not-for-profits, of community groups, of academics, scientists, who work around the 3 diseases. All of the 3 diseases have these sort of global plans to end the diseases. And the Global Fund is one of the key partners in terms of ending all 3 of the diseases, but not the only one. And so it often works in partnership with UNICEF, say, in delivering services, or a local government, sometimes at the sub-national level, sometimes at the national level, with not-for-profits, sometimes like Care Canada is one of the ones that does, or Plan Canada, Plan Canada does some work around the Global Fund. The Global Fund has been around since 2002, and that lovely video that we saw is trying to make sure that we all have that sense of hope in terms of what can be done with the investments that we've seen. 20 million lives saved globally since 2002, with the over $20 billion that have been invested by various donor governments and private sector and by local governments as well. Currently, the Global Fund is active in over 100 countries and has over 400 grants that are active. And eligibility is determined each year in terms of which countries are eligible, and it's based on a country's income, per capita income, as well as the disease burden. So there's different sort of categories of eligibility, and I'm not going to get too much into the details of it because it gets a little bit technical. But there are categories of eligibility, but essentially some countries like Zimbabwe, where Loyce is from, is eligible for grants in HIV, TB, and malaria. And some countries are only eligible for grants in HIV or TB, that kind of thing. That partnership approach that the Global Fund has is really a unique sort of perspective. It's governments themselves form these advisory bodies, which they call these country coordinating mechanisms, that work together amongst those kinds of groups within the country on the diseases or the disease that's eligible to come up with a concept note. So the Global Fund doesn't go to Zimbabwe and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and you need to do it by this, and you need to do it this way, and you need to procure your products in this way, and that kind of thing. They have some guidelines, and some of those guidelines are really important and deal with issues like gender equity and human rights and those kinds of things. But they don't go into a country. The country comes to them, and those country coordinating mechanisms, those advisory boards, are supported by the Global Fund so that not-for-profits, community-based organizations are supported in the process of being a part of that, developing those concept notes. And so I think it might be interesting a little bit to hear about sort of what role that you and your organization have had in terms of concept note development in Zimbabwe, and what kinds of plans you have in Zimbabwe sort of through the Global Fund work that you do.
Okay, so in Zimbabwe, we have what we call the CCM, the Country Coordinating Mechanism, where different partners who are working in terms of HIV, tuberculosis and malaria come together, including the people who are affected and infected by these diseases. So what we do is that in Zimbabwe we come together and we discuss what are the critical challenges that people are facing, especially adolescents and young people, including also adults, and we try to put on the table what exactly needs to be prioritized in terms of when we apply for the Global Fund money. So recently in Zimbabwe, we applied for incentive funding, and because there were a lot of challenges, because most of the time adolescents and young people, they face a lot of challenges. They struggle to take their HIV or tuberculosis treatment properly. This is due to the stigma in the society that we face on a daily basis, or maybe the attitude of the healthcare workers in the facilities that we go and collect our medication. So that's how we sit down as a country and we draft down what exactly do we want to influence. And when we talk about there is medication on the table, it also takes that motive for adolescents and young people to be able to be taking their HIV treatment. And most of the time, we won't be able to see how adolescents are doing, because sometimes they say, I am taking my medication, or they are not taking because of mental health challenges or psychological, or they are not accepting their HIV status. And we have then written down within our concept note when we writing our concept note for the Global Fund over the incentive funding. And what we did is that some of the priority that we did in Zimbabwe is issues around the viral load machines, that is how well people are doing on treatment, so that it actually motivates people to continue taking their HIV treatment properly. So that's what we have been doing in Zimbabwe. And also we have, within the incentive funding through the Global Fund, we have also written a concept note that we want to start doing what we call the peer-led interventions, where we have peers supporting each other by doing home visits or working with the clinic, following up on people who would have stopped going to the clinic for their resupply of HIV and tuberculosis treatment. So this program will also start next year in 2017, where we have finally done a short survey to really see the impact of the programs that we are trying to do, especially for adolescents and young people. So yeah.
Okay. A lot of work. You'll be busy. Will you still have time to play and jump in the streets? This is a photo story that we were fortunate to get some funding to do of Loyce, to try and show what daily life looks like, what your daily work looks like. And my favorite is, if you haven't spotted it yet, there's one of her and there's nothing on the ground, like no feet, no arms, nothing. She's just jumping up in the air with her work and her people. So one of the things that has always struck me since I've gotten to know you over the last year is how passionate you are about the work that you do and how important you feel that it is. And I was just wondering, a lot of the people in this room come to this work and this kind of advocacy because they feel a passion for whether it's global issues or maybe places where they've lived before. What are you passionate about now? What are you excited about?
What I'm really passionate about is advocating or voicing the voice of adolescents and young people who haven't been given the opportunity. And this is at a personal level, because for me, in growing up with HIV, has been a long journey for me. And in 2010, when I was staying with one of my other relatives, I faced a lot of emotional, physical, and verbal abuse. And I tried killing myself because I could not contain the situation. And I took all of the medication that I had, and I texted one of the aunties in the organization that I took all of the medication, I just want to die. It's just the end of me. I can't handle the situation at home. So they texted me and they told me to come to the office. And when I went, I was admitted in the hospital for 2 days. And when I was discharged, I got massive counseling. And that's when I said to myself, if I'm going to live in this world, despite the challenges that I'm facing, I want to come out in the open and share the stories that adolescents and young people are facing. Because when I was a peer counselor doing home visits, I also saw some of the challenges that adolescents and young people were facing. So it actually also motivated me to say, at a personal level, I have also faced those kind of challenges, and I have seen also other young people and adolescents facing the similar challenges that I was also facing. And I said to myself, I want to support adolescents and young people gain their confidence, be able to take their medication properly, and be able to realize their dreams and hopes for the future. So it was really at a personal level that made me become this passionate young woman living with HIV who wants to share my story and the stories of adolescents and young people growing up with HIV. So, yeah.
So just that. Just checking in on that. You know, I think, you know, one of the things that we talk a lot about in the work that I do and the work that we do with people like Loyce and some of her champion colleagues like Anton and Erica, is there's a term, it's called key and vulnerable populations, and these are, for the 3 diseases, these are the groups of people, the communities of people who are most at risk of the 3 diseases. And when you talk about adolescents and youth, you know, it's a really critical time. I mean, we know from, you know, we know from work around maternal and newborn child health, we know how critical it is to reach women and girls, you know, long before they have, you know, are even thinking of having babies, to make sure that they're, you know, healthy and that kind of thing. When it comes to the 3 diseases, I mean, malaria predominantly affects young children under 5 and pregnant women. HIV, a lot of the increasing rates of HIV are amongst key and vulnerable populations, including young women. And in TB, while traditionally seen as sort of a male disease in sort of those 25 to 45-year-olds, you know, I think that there's been more research over the last few years and understanding that some of the stigma and discrimination that TB patients face is actually much more acute, or at least equally acute amongst women, and also very difficult to diagnose and treat in children. And so the work that you do in terms of mentoring and supporting and counseling and making sure that they can access treatment and, you know how to do that, it's a really vulnerable population as a whole when it comes to the 3 diseases in terms of youth and adolescents. So I think that's really important. What do you think are some of the most, like, what do you think are some of the best ways that we can, what do you find, sorry, let me think about this. What do you think are the best ways to empower youth and adolescents to take that kind of ownership when it comes to their health and their, you know, their maybe their own treatment, or, you know, bettering their health? What do you think are some of the best ways that you've seen that can do that?
Honestly, from experience in working with adolescents and young people, I feel that the best ways to empower adolescents and young people is by bringing them together, taking a moment to listen to their needs or their challenges that they're facing, and believing in them. And beyond that, I believe that it starts from the heart and with love. And if we have love for the people around us, I believe that love has the power to change everything. And it gives you that drive to want to support adolescents become empowered. You know, when there is love in a certain room, and when there is, you know, that ability to say, I'm not just there, it's not just my job to support adolescents and young people, but it's about showing us love. You know, love has the power to put a smile on a person. Love has the power to give us that drive to be able to do things that are beyond what we would believe that we can do. So I believe that the first thing that we need to do is showing love and bringing, I can say that mentoring them, mentoring adolescents and young people become partners, not only beneficiaries, but also the agents of change who have got a critical role to play in the end of the AIDS epidemic. And they also have a role to play in the reduction of new HIV infection. So I think the best way to empower young people and adolescents is by giving them the opportunity to express who they are, being mentored to become, to express who they feel that they can be in the future, and being given the opportunity to become agents of change, to become partners when you talk about ending AIDS by 2030. So yeah, I think those are the most critical things that needs to be done to empower adolescents and young people.
That's really great. Love is all you need. Good. I couldn't resist, sorry. That's totally cheesy, but I couldn't resist. I guess one of the things that we just wanted to touch on a little bit is because Canada is hosting this pledging conference next week, this is actually it's a bit of a big deal if you weren't, aware. The US and Germany have essentially hosted all of the previous replenishments. So this is the first time really that a different country is hosting this type since they've started these kinds of sort of formal replenishment moments. So it's a big deal. Canada has always been one of the top donors to the Global Fund. I mean, I think it's well over, somewhere close to 1.3 billion Canadian has been invested since 2002. And the Global Fund is not this sort of perfect organization, and there's certainly a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the work that you do is about, making sure that that the role and engagement of communities and key and vulnerable populations is integrated in a way that's more than just lip service, that's more than just checking a box on an application or anything like that. Because that's part of the growing, and that's the great thing about the organization as well. It's been busy saving 20 million lives since 2002 with these over $20 billion in investments. It's also been continuing to learn as an organization and continuing to find different ways to make sure that communities and people affected and impacted by the diseases are sort of involved and engaged. And Canada's contributions to that have been really critical because they've been steady and even back, not that I'm going to suggest that you need to advocate for this, but you could. Back in the day before the previous government, the Liberal governments used to top up money to the Global Fund when there was extra money left in the budgets at the end of the year. So, something like that could, be seen again as a really great move, but some of those came at, just as a hint, some of those came at really critical moments for the fund when they were facing shortfalls or other donors who had made pledges, for reasons that they could not foresee in terms of economic impact within their own countries, couldn't necessarily live up to their contributions. So some of those came at actually really critical times, and without that, you probably wouldn't have seen the progressive growth in terms of impact of diseases, right? And that's really important. But one of the things that, the ask for next week of the world is that we raise $13 billion to fight the 3 diseases over the next 3 years. And that's not all the money that's needed, right? There's an estimated almost $100 billion that is needed over the next 3 years to fight the 3 diseases in the world. And if we don't meet very close to that target as a world, then we're going to start to see the kinds of things that Loyce does every day that helps people, empowers people, young people, that makes sure that people get the treatment that they need and get the support that they need to do that. We're going to see a slip. We are going to start to see the infection and death rates that we've seen coming down. We are quickly going to see them start to go up, and then we are going to be back where we were. We are going to have lost essentially the investments that we've made, and we're going to have to remake them. So we need everybody to love everybody. We also need everybody to do what Loyce does and what all of you do in terms of advocating for the Global Fund, and that next week it's not done. But that's not enough. 13 billion is not enough. And that's a hard thing to say because we know that that's a lot, and that's a lot of contribution, right? So I don't know if you've been on the stage with a few people in the last 6 months. We started off with in May with Mr. Trudeau. And who were you on stage with in June?
Prince Harry and Elton John.
That was July. In June, you were on stage with the UN Secretary General, weren't you? She's forgotten. And now it's September, and you're on stage with me. And I'm not going to ask you to, pick favorites or anything like that. But I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about what's needed in terms of the global community, the Canadian community, to keep up this momentum in terms of addressing the 3 diseases.
I think what's really needed at this critical time is the continued advocacy that everybody has been doing over the past years. And at this time, like you have said, that the $18 billion is not enough. And there is a lot of advocacy that needs to be done with everyone, with different partners at every angle of the world. And I believe that if we take a moment to understand the epidemic and get to know how important it is for us to have a fully funded global fund, it can actually be a good way to start off, to make sure that at the end of the day we make sure that our advocacy is not just an advocacy that is not seen to have much value, but we advocate with passion and with that love and that dedication. And I believe if we have those qualities as advocates that try to influence governments to make sure that we have a fully funded global fund, will go a long way in making sure that the people who are in the most need of the TB, HIV, and malaria medication have access to this treatment. And it all begins with us in this room, and carrying on the work of really advocating and lobbying with our parliamentarians or with our congressmen to make them also understand the importance of the global fund and how really it plays a critical role, especially when we talk about adolescent girls and young women who are mostly affected by the epidemic. I think will go a long way in terms of making sure that we have a fully funded global fund and we save lives and we end the epidemic.
Yeah. Let's do that. Shall we? We're in. Hope you all join us. Just to say that 13 billion is not nothing. Let's remember that and celebrate. I think what we will come at least very close to accomplishing next week. We're hopeful. That should save an additional 8 million lives, prevent 300 million new infections across the 3 diseases, and overall contribute close to $100 billion in terms of economic impact globally. For every $100 million extra we can get, though, we can save another 60,000 lives. We can reduce 2.3 million infections. We can get an additional 300 million invested in by domestic governments, by the implementing governments themselves, and we can generate, $2.2 billion US in economic gains. So every little bit really counts, and so the advocacy that we can do globally, the advocacy we have an opportunity as Canada, who's seen as a leader right now in terms of hosting this replenishment and 20% increase in that kind of thing. Like, we have that opportunity, so we can do it. We know what needs to be done, and we just have to do it with love and fierce determination, like you. That's it, I think. So we would be happy to take any questions or comments or anything, and thank you for being here.
Does anyone?
Yeah, my interest is to know when, just by increasing this contribution by 20%, how long it will take to, if you think that gradually it goes on in that fashion, how long it will take for Canada to come up with the 0.7 level?
A fair amount of time. To come up to the 0.7 level, I mean, Canada's pretty far from 0.7 in terms of its ODA, and so it has a fair way to go to do that. But with love and determination, I'm sure that they can get it done, right? But no, I mean, it would be a fair amount, and of course, the Global Fund is is one of a number of really important interventions, both in terms of these diseases, but also in terms of global health. And so you'd want to see increases as well into some of the work that, that's really important and sort of part of that partnership, vaccine development. It's really critical to get a vaccine, if possible, in HIV and TB, right? And that work requires a significant amount of investment, which could help bring up Canada's to sort of 0.7, but it will take some time at 20% per sort of program. But the Global Fund is one of the biggest investments that the Canadian government makes in terms of one channel, I guess. Did you, anything to add? No? Okay.
I have a small, I guess, money question. So you talked about the 13 billion, and that's not enough, and then you talked about the almost 100 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's bilateral aid and government donors, and on that 13 billion, where does the rest come from?
So at the moment, in terms of the 97, almost $100 billion that's needed, a lot of it comes bilaterally, a lot of it comes through investments that Canada also participates in terms of the World Bank, in terms of direct bilateral engagement with countries. It also goes through other multilateral investments that Canada makes in terms of supporting UN agencies directly and indirectly as well. So, but I think, like, I would have to go back and look at the actual numbers, and you can. The Global Fund published its investment case, which sort of spells all of this out in terms of what's needed in terms of investments. There's still a gap, but it's felt that with this increase in the Global Fund, and if bilateral engagement can remain the same over the next 3 years, and then domestic resources, which you could probably speak a little bit more to, if domestic resources increase by sort of the same rate that they've increased over the last 3 years, then we can get to a point where we are still maintaining an increase as opposed to just maintaining a flatlining of accomplishments, if that makes sense, right? So we talk about scale up, maintaining, or falling, and so we can at least maintain a small amount over the next 3 years, enough to keep the progressive curve against the diseases going. So I don't know if you wanted to talk anything else about domestic resource mobilization, or?
Not really, but I can say for Zimbabwe we have what we call the AIDS funding, where we do our own resource mobilization in the country, and the AIDS funding is collected through the tax. Then that money is used to make sure that within Zimbabwe, issues around AIDS-related issues, including tuberculosis, are addressed, despite the funding from donors and other partners, to making sure that in the near future we make sure that we have sustainability in terms of when we are doing our programs. So we are still doing more of mobilization to input within the domestic financing, though at this moment within Zimbabwe we are going through a financial challenge in terms of our currency, and there's a lot of things that are going on, but we believe that we'll be able to get there, but at the moment we're still depending on the Global Fund, because the Global Fund supports, like Zimbabwe, 80% in terms of the money and the drugs that we supply to the people who are affected by the diseases that the Global Fund is focusing on. So
yeah, and that domestic resource mobilization piece is really critical and has been more at the forefront of the conversation for the last 3 years. And it's easy to think that what's most important is like the donor money, and it is, in terms of like acquisition of treatment, drugs and that kind of thing in some places, because of the purchasing power of countries and what currencies they have access to in terms of purchasing drugs and other medical equipment and that kind of thing, and accessing it at good prices, which is really critical. But actually domestic resources on the 3 diseases in the countries where the Global Fund is active have been on the rise, like in the 10s and 20% kind of range over the last 3 years. And that's part of what the Global Fund does, is sort of support countries to find that fiscal space through innovative financing mechanisms like social impact bonds, which I've never personally been a big fan of here, but in Canada, but they work in a different way sometimes when you have folks like the Gates Foundation underwriting them, for example, who are not a for-profit organization that's trying to make their money back. It's just that way. But anyway, so domestic resource mobilization is actually really critical. It's not, and we depend, in my work at GFAN, we depend upon our colleagues who run regional GFAN hubs in Africa and Asia Pacific to sort of take the lead in terms of prioritizing what actions are and what governments are right for good increases to support programs.
So in addition to the peer-to-peer mentorships that you're talking about and procurement of drugs and that sort of thing, what other global funds what other initiatives or programs or organizations are funded by Global Fund within Zimbabwe?
So there are a lot of organizations. So what happens in Zimbabwe is that we have the primary recipient, which are the UN, who is given the money to control the money for Zimbabwe. And then from there, the government decides on, so civil societies, then write the concept as well to say why do they need the Global Fund money and what are the areas that they want to focus on in terms of issues around social protection and issues around the well-being of the people who are affected by the three diseases. So what happens is that the government of Zimbabwe, like the Ministry of Health, the National AIDS Council, with other bilateral partners like the UN and the civil society, then comes together and have what we call the country coordinating mechanism, which is the CCM, which is also one of the recommendations by the Global Fund. So what happens in those meetings in Zimbabwe, we then discuss which civil societies are eligible to get the money to implement at community level, where we can have more results in terms of people getting better after receiving treatment, the motivation, the making sure that people have access to viral load machines, or young women who are pregnant, or to make sure that we do not have new HIV infections through mother-to-child transmission, those kind of programs. So that's what we do. And in Zimbabwe, we've got what we call the sub-recipients. So the sub-recipients are like the bigger organization who's got the capacity to then handle such big money if they're given the money. If they are saved in the system, they can get the money. So the sub-recipient then selects another sub-recipient, like a community-based organization, but who doesn't have that capacity like the sub-recipient or the primary recipient like the government. So that's what happens. And for Zimbabwe, the peer-led intervention program that we want to scale up in Zimbabwe, which is going to focus on adolescents and young people. The project is going to start next year. And there are also programs that are being funded, like for the key populations under the Global Fund money, where we are also looking at those kind of programs, because within the CCM as well meetings, we also have the key populations on the desk to also voice what kind of programs do we need to put in place at community level. So in Zimbabwe, we've got what we call the GALS. It's called the Gays Lesbian Association of Zimbabwe. They are the ones who focus more on the key populations in terms of the LGBTIQ community. Then we've got what we call, there are a number of organizations like SAC, Southern African Trust, also receives money as a sub-recipient, then gives to other smaller community organizations to then implement at a local level. So there are a number of organizations that receives money from the Global Fund that is not necessarily going to be going for procuring medication or the viral load machines. So that's what happens. It's a long process though, but yeah.
I think the diversity of what the Global Fund will support when the rights evidence-based presentation is made by country CCMs is really interesting. I mean, some of the more interesting ones I've sort of heard of are, in Cote d'Ivoire, one of the local sex worker collectives has an education program which is actually aimed at people in uniform, they call it. And so it's aimed at doctors and military personnel and police who might come across sex workers and across their work. And it's about sensitization with them about how to discuss the issues of infection and those kinds of things. And it's a sensitization program with people in uniforms who are almost always men, but still, like that's an interesting one that I know there was one that we've talked a lot about in Botswana where non-resident prisoners, so if you were in prison in Botswana but not a citizen of Botswana, you were not given HIV or TB treatment or other medical care while in prison. And so there was a legal case that was fought in Botswana, and the Global Fund supported like the civil society organization that was sort of leading the legal trust, Bonello Legal Trust organization of Botswana, I'm not really sure, but sort of supported that. And so like there's this real variety, and it really depends on what is needed in each location. And in some cases, the Global Fund, you talked about Syria earlier. The Global Fund has the capacity, unlike some organizations, because it's a little bit smaller and it's a little bit more flexible in terms of how it gives out its money, to go into conflict situations or fragile states and operate well, because they don't have to work with governments. Unlike, say, our bilateral aid as a government has to go government to government, the Global Fund doesn't have to do that. So they can work with these sub-recipients, subnational recipients, sub-recipients, and make sure that TB treatment is not interrupted for refugees, or HIV treatment as well. So yeah, it's incredibly diverse. It's no longer, I think for a little while, the Global Fund was seen as this really sort of vertical kind of delivery. And it was like, we're putting doctors in chairs with HIV medications or, that kind of thing. And now, I think over the last sort of 12 years of the Global Fund, it's now seen as this more dynamic, community-led, diverse kind of investments that it makes.
I have a question. As citizen advocates, I'm wondering if you can give us some ideas on how to advocate our government. Maybe it's partly a question for yourself as an MP as well, but what tips and tricks do you have for us to do more effective advocacy work?
Okay. Honestly, I do not have specific things that I can say these are like the tricks to use. But one thing that I have always said to people is, if we understand what the challenges are, and if it begins within the heart itself, and if we have that love, it will give us the drive for ongoing advocacy. And I believe that when we start advocacy, it shouldn't just end there or we just do it once, but it should be an ongoing thing to keep on being engaged with the parliamentarians or with the congressmen. And I think it's also critical to make sure that at some point you have sort of like consultative meetings with the influential people and try to bring maybe the voices of the people who are affected, not only from Africa, but also from within the different states within Canada or the different provinces within Canada, to really see that this is not only an African, it's not only affecting Africa, but it's also affecting also Canada. It's not only about the 3 diseases, like for example, it also focuses on poverty, to also say these are the kind of issues that we are facing. And it's always good to make sure that when we go and meet with our parliamentarians, we know the issues, we know what we need, we know what our recommendations are, and what are the key indicators that we want to say the parliamentarians also reflect when they have their own meetings, to say these are the kind of indicators that we need to put in place, and these are the indicators that we need our governments to invest in terms of at country level or at global level. So I think that will also help to make sure that we have constructive conversations with them that will enable them to really put it at a personal level to understand what needs to be done and the impact of them being involved. Yes, I think that would be it.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah. Elizabeth, right?
I wanted to say thank you because it takes a lot of guts to stand up and talk about something that is really stupid to us. And it makes a huge difference. And it really personalizes something that can seem very theoretical and very far away. So I wanted to say thank you. I do have another question.
Yeah.
How does the Global Fund relate to the Global Drug Facility, the TB meds?
How does it relate? So I would say in the past it has related more. Like it has worked. The Global Fund is not a procurer of drugs itself. It doesn't stockpile drugs that countries have to buy, but it has a role in terms of trying to help find sort of the best pricing for all like NATs and ARVs and TB drugs and those kinds of things. And the GDF is interesting because Canada has supported it in the past quite actively and importantly. But I think there's been a bit of a movement away from the GDF. And I'm not 100% sure that I understand the reasons for that, but I do know that the Global Fund itself has tried to find all of those kinds of block procurers who procure at a decent price, and they've set up a new system which has a really, do you remember what it's called? It's WOMBO, right? Isn't that, Mark, the executive director, gets very excited when he talks about WOMBO.org, and Canada has actually invested money in terms of the setup of this particular initiative from the Global Fund. And it's meant to give countries online, real-time access to all of the types of drugs, medical products, diagnostics, whatever that they might need for any of the 3 diseases from a variety of different sources, which would presumably include the GDF, but would include other private suppliers, other sort of bulk suppliers, like all of these places where they could go to buy drugs so that they can get real-time pricing. And the hope is that it will create more competition, thereby reducing pricing, but also make it easier for governments when they are sort of doing their modeling of like, well, I have $1 million and I need to buy this many ARVs, they can get the right price and sort of secure those contracts a little bit easier. So, but the Global Fund is not the most active that it could be around drug pricing or drug acquisition, so I wouldn't necessarily, I would say that's an area for improvement over the next decade.
Very diplomatic.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up unless you have, but we're sticking around. So, yeah, if there's any other questions or comments, we're happy to take them.
Yeah, so if everyone can join me giving a big round of applause for Loyce and I think it was really well said by the person at the back that Loyce, it takes a lot of courage to stand up in front of a room and tell your story, and we really appreciate you doing that for us tonight. And I think you started off by saying you were humbled to be here, but I think we all feel humbled to share this space with you and to get to hear it from you. And Katie, of course. Same goes for you. So we do hope you'll stick around. We have there are drinks and snacks, and we'd love to kind of open up the conversation so that you can mingle and talk with Loyce or Katie or myself or Shelley. Shelley and I both work for Results Canada, and we work to equip citizens across Canada with the skills they need in order to be advocates and raise their voices around these issues. So if you'd like to learn more about that, we'd love to tell you about it. And I will pass it over to Ali, who opened us off with such great remarks. If you wanted to offer any closing words, you're welcome to. So.
Haven't thought about it, but always ready to just share some of my perspectives or some of my concerns. The question was, how can we make sure that organizations such as Results or the Global Fund actually can do a better job in terms of advocacy. The reality of the matter is that there are so many different projects going on, that are doing amazing work on the ground throughout the world. So, and that's exactly where all of you come in. Advocacy really, really does matter. The reality is when it comes to governments, if they see people are seized of the issues, they know the issues, they're arguing for them, they're pushing for them, they're advocating for them, it makes a huge difference. Because if they don't hear from various organizations, as amazing as that organization may be, then it's not going to make the cut. We live in a hyper-competitive world where everyone has amazing ideas, but obviously decision makers, they are put a favor those organizations that are the most active, they're doing amazing things. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing, I think the other trend which really, really does help is when recipient governments or civil society groups in various countries do good work. When people see that, they just realize like, wow, because as you can imagine, a lot of times people are not familiar with all the challenges that are going on around the world. So when they see the results, when they see those indices, when they see people who are rolling up their sleeves and doing amazing work, such as Loyce, it really makes an impact. How could it not make an impact? So it takes a number of different factors to come together, but I think having awesome, energetic people on the ground is probably the most effective. So just thought I'd share those two